These days, it seems like every developer's trying to create the most photorealistic action hero possible, complete with wrinkles and laugh lines and those tiny face hairs that you can only see if you're standing uncomfortably close to somebody. That does not describe Jeff Minter, the legendary and insanely influential game developer that filled his game with sheep, camels, and a whole bunch of llamas. His unique point of view is front and center in Llamasoft, the Jeff Minter story, an interactive documentary and museum exhibition that collects more than 40 of his best games, including a handful of rare finds from his early days as a developer. This is the newest video game compilation from Digital Eclipse, the company behind last year's amazing making of Karateka, as well as the surprisingly sprawling Atari 50 celebration. Is this another high watermark for the masters of game preservation? That's what we're about to find out when we take the tour of the farm in Llamasoft, the Jeff Minter story, the newest entry in the Gold Master series. Jeff Minter is not your typical game developer. This much is clear the moment you start this impressive new game compilation. Sporting long hair and living on a llama farm somewhere in Wales, Jeff is described by his friends and colleagues as a rebel and a rock star. He's the rare example of a developer who has somehow managed to buck the system, yet still prospers in an ever-changing industry that seems designed to stamp out people like him. For more than 40 years, Jeff has been able to cut his own path and make the quirky games that he wants to play. And this new interactive documentary takes us on a journey of his rise to prominence and what it took to keep the Llamasoft dream alive for so many years. Now, the first thing you need to know is that Llamasoft, the Jeff Minter story, is the second game in Digital Eclipse's Gold Master series. This means that the interface and the general approach is almost identical to what we saw from the making of Karateka. This is a compilation that takes us year by year through Jeff Minter's career, from the earliest days when he's making games in his parents' garage right up to the release of Tempest 2000 on the Atari Jaguar, the franchise that he's probably best known for these days. As we go through the months and years, we'll watch video clips revealing how each of the games came to be, as well as look at the artwork, cassette tapes, and instruction manuals associated with each title. Sometimes there will be cool extras, like the notes that he kept when he was coming up with ideas and the way that they advertised his games at the time. We get further context as the timeline reveals critical reviews and interviews with the British gaming press. One of the coolest extras in this package is the newsletter that Jeff wrote and sent out to the fans, allowing us a rare chance to see what he thought at the time about not only his own games, but also where the industry was headed in general. What ultimately sets this apart from the making of Karateka is the struggle and the grind. Where the previous entry was about the process of making one of the most influential games of all time, the Jeff Minter story is more about what it takes to stay afloat in this industry, from making dozens of unique games to getting people to actually buy them. Look, with his long hair and rebellious attitude, it's real easy to compare Jeff's story to a rock star. Here's a guy who got to start making games in his parents' garage, imitating the popular games at the time, both in subtle and blatant ways. It was a time when a developer could sell their no-budget title on a cassette tape at a local computer show and make enough money to fund the next good idea. And that's what Jeff did, slowly building up a fan base and finding his own voice as a game designer. Along the way, Jeff has to deal with bad business partners, publishers going bankrupt, game systems that never came out, and an industry that sometimes feels like it's out of step with the kind of games that he wants to make. And yet, he continues to come out on top more than 4 decades later. What's exciting is that we finally get to play many of Llamasoft's earliest games, the ones that shaped Jeff as a game maker. I'm talking about the weird first-person maze game 3D, the weird rodent-killing game Rat Man, and of course City Bomber, a controversial game that was satirizing the war in Argentina. This makes way for more traditional titles like the Space Invaders-influenced Abductor, the Defender-influenced Andy's Attack, and the Blade Runner-influenced action game Grid Runner, which proved to be Llamasoft's first big hit. This is the first big turning point for the company, as Jeff starts to show his own quirky personality with titles like Attack of the Mutant Camels, Metagalactic Llamas Battle at the Edge of Time, and of course, Sheep in Space. These titles were still inspired by many of the arcade hits of that era, but they always had a quirky sense of humor and would usually twist the formula in some fun ways. And just like the making of Karateka, we get to see many of these games across multiple formats, allowing us to choose which version we prefer to play. While there are definitely a few games here that I will likely never go back to, there are also some real gems here. A big surprise for me was Hover Bover, a game where you steal some poor sap's lawnmower and you attempt to mow your entire lawn before he or his dog catch you. Another great game was the company's first foray into shareware, Llamatron 2112, a Robotron parody with some of the most random enemies that you're ever gonna see. I was also blown away with Attack of the Mutant Camels 89, which is a game that was set to come out on the cancelled Conix multi-system. When the company cancelled that console, Llamasoft stopped working on the game. But what we have here is an absolute blast, even in its incomplete form. This is easily the best version of the Mutant Camel saga, and it's a shame that it never got completed and released on the Atari Jaguar. Speaking of the Jaguar, we can't talk about a Llamasoft compilation without mentioning Tempest 2000. Through video interviews, we learn how Jeff Minter got a chance to remake this classic shooter and how it completely reshaped the way he viewed game development. It's a game that surprised everybody by becoming the Jaguar's first killer app and the best reviewed game on the system, forever linking Jeff's name to Atari's classic shoot-'em-up franchise. Now, I completely understand why Digital Eclipse decided to make Tempest 2000 the stopping point for this compilation, as it's definitely the company's high point after the ups and downs of the 1980s. That said, I kind of feel like there's more to the Tempest story that could have been said. I know a lot of people were hoping that we might get a playable version of Tempest 3000, a game that has been seemingly lost to time because it was only released on Nuon-enabled DVD players. The story also completely glosses over TXK, a game that led Atari to actually sue Llamasoft before eventually settling and re-teaming to make Tempest 4000. It would have been interesting to hear people talk about that part of Jeff's legacy, but it's not even hinted at here. It's also disappointing that we don't get a chance to experience Defender 2000 due to rights issues. The early games and interviews remind us of how influenced Jeff was by that original arcade game. So it would have been great to have one of the final games in the package show you his 64-bit take on the shooter. Alas, it's not here. And that's a shame. It's also a shame that we don't get Space Giraffe, Grid Runner Revolution, and some of the other games released in the early days of digital distribution. The good news is that even if it's missing a few titles, there's more than enough to keep you playing for a long time to come. What I love about this compilation is just how many of these games wouldn't be available outside of this collection, making it a crucial buy if you have any interest in this era of game development. These are games that could very easily be lost to time, yet this package does a wonderful job of not only preserving each and every one of them, but also giving you a reason to actually care. But look, as good as these games are, and many of them are legitimate classics, the real reason to buy this game is to experience Jeff Minter's story of struggle and perseverance. It's to watch him talk about the trippy music visualizers and to play around with them yourself. It's to see the many, many pictures of Jeff selling his games at computer shows. It's to read his newsletter. And most importantly, it's to see him hang out with the sheep and llamas on his farm. In this high-pressure, crunch-time world, we can learn a lot from Jeff Minter's story. Although it's missing a few key games, Llamasoft, the Jeff Minter story is yet another fantastic video game compilation from Digital Eclipse. It tells the story of a video game rebel who used his quirky personality and eye for addictive games to stay relevant for more than 40 years. This interactive documentary and museum exhibit takes you inside some of his earliest games and shows you the highs and lows of the early days of the games industry. With more than 40 games and tons of extras, Llamasoft, the Jeff Minter story is another great entry in Digital Eclipse's Gold Master series. Hey, thanks for watching our review. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new reviews and features almost every day. Now, here's the question I have for you. What company or franchise should be next in the Gold Master series? This may sound like an odd one, but I might go with idsoft. Look, there are tons of early id games that just never came out on console, and I'd kinda like to know the story behind some of them. Plus, think about all the variations of Doom that came out that they can include. Let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back later this week with, something? That Nintendo Switch Online announcement really shook things up this week. So, we'll see what happens. While you wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,